Welcome to Waging War, the podcast where we discuss the battle between truth and lies. We believe that if you know the truth will set you free.
Hello and welcome back to Waging War. I am sitting here with Annette, who is the Director of Communications and Operations of Renew. But we're going to get right into your story because it is very impactful. There's a ton of hope in it, but there's a ton of tragedy. So Annette, thanks for being bold and brave to come on here and talk about it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you said this is the first time of it being recorded.
Yes, I've shared my story and my mom's story different times, but it's not been recorded to where, you might say the wrong thing or whatever. So we're just going to do the best we can.
Yeah, and I know that it takes a lot of bravery. And so we've already prayed. The Lord's going to go before you. So let's talk about the most traumatic. I'm just saying from my perspective, you can answer that for yourself, but just because of the tragedy that's involved. And I know that this is the first time you're talking about it recorded, and so you're doing a very brave thing. But it's in regard to your mother and your father. And so I'm going to hand this over to you, Annette, and you can start wherever you think you should start.
So I think that it's important to start with where their relationship started and what I know about it. And a little bit of a disclaimer that as I was growing up, I had different people telling me versions of the story, and that was their version, how they experienced it. And then as I got older, at some point I did reach out to my biological father and I got his version of the story. And so just piecing together all of those pieces of the puzzle to what I believe to be the most truthful version of the story. I know that my mother believed that she was in love with my father, so I believe that I was conceived in love because she married him, and I have things that she wrote, in regards to him, that she was in love. And my mom and dad had the same birthday. They were both born on July the 4th. And so she believed that that was sort of a fate, not a coincidence that they had the same birthday, but that it was also on a holiday. And they met on horseback. Like, I guess she gave rides, maybe in Gatlinburg or Sevierville or somewhere, like on the trail. And I think maybe he did too, or he did something with the horses. And the story that I was told was that one of the horses took off with her up the mountain, and he rescued her. She hurt her ankle or something, and he rescued her. And that she just believed when they got to talking on the way down the mountain, found out they had the same birthday, that this was her Prince Charming. So it's sad to say that out loud and know how the story ends, but
What is it? What's coming up for you as you say that?
I think just that I can identify with that, just being in love with this idea of a person. And then in things I know about her, things that she wrote, just knowing that she was in love with the idea of my dad and the idea of a soulmate, this predestined person, that you're one and only. And just knowing that it ended tragically in her death.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
So my mom was a victim, not a survivor of domestic violence. There were newspaper articles and different things from the story that solidified that I was with her when that happened, and I was left there in the home with her dead body.
What happened?
So I was told growing up that there were different incidents of drug-related things going on in their life. I was told one story about that they were fighting over a VCR and he pawned it and she went to get it back and, things blew up. What he told me was that they were partying off and on, him mostly, and that he struggled with anger because he struggled with the death of his own father, who had committed suicide via shotgun, which I can't imagine seeing as a child.
Yeah, in front of him.
In front of him.
Yeah.
And he said that he just had explosive anger and that when he left, he thought she was alive, that he could have sworn that she said a curse word to him. But I actually read the autopsy report myself because as I got older, which I think a lot of adopted people, you want to know. And I think it was like 1:31. It was over a minute that he strangled her. Her back was broken 2 places. She had prior concussions. And so the facts tell me that this was a volatile relationship, that there were more than just this one incident of physical abuse. And while he may have really thought that she was still alive, and it was not premeditated, he was not charged with that, but he did spend 22 years in prison.
And how old were you?
I was 4 months old.
So what happened to Annette when that happened?
Immediately, I went home with certain family members, but nobody could get along. And so I went into foster care. And I don't know if I went to foster care first or I said immediately, but I don't know if which one came first. I just know that there were multiple incidents of foster care. And I was told stories growing up that this person bribed that person, to try to get custody of me. This person was unfit. What I remember was just that nobody could get along and put me first. But in that aspect, and if any family's watching this, I have complete compassion because being a parent now, I can't imagine what kind of grief that they were all going through this horrific death. And now there's this child, right? While all these people are grieving, who my mom's parents were divorced and they were both remarried. And so, the dynamics that come with that anyway, you wouldn't expect them to get along, and especially not while they're all deeply grieving. So I don't have any resentment or anything. I think that in that moment, everybody did the best they could with what they had. But inevitably, I was adopted by a great aunt and uncle who were a little bit older. And I was maybe 7 when I found out. I found pictures of my mom in a casket, and then they told me, great-grandmother told me, this is who that is, this is actually your mother, and just things unraveled from there,
So what beliefs about yourself, about the world, about God, do you think were shaped inside of your heart from all of that? As a young child, finding out this, what was that like to be so young and figuring that out as a young child?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
But a good one. I think at that age, you can't fathom violence. And so what you know from TV and books and stories that parents are supposed to feel and how they're supposed to behave, that just made me feel like anything I thought that I knew wasn't real.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about that?
During that time, at the same time, my adopted parents were going through divorce. And so it just solidified the feeling of like adult people don't make good decisions.
Yeah.
Like they don't know. And then you're just a byproduct of whatever decisions that they make.
But you had said that did it create like this existential crisis almost? Like what is real? Like because that's very disorienting to be so young and to find out something so tragic. I mean, that's very disorienting. I could absolutely understand how all of a sudden these thoughts come in of like, how do I know it's real? How can I trust what people have told me? How can I trust my own perceptions even? I mean, I could totally understand how that type of thought process would enter into someone's train of thought. And the belief could be that I really can't know what is true because I thought I did, and my whole world has just been flipped upside down. Like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then when you are being honest or ask people different questions or try to talk about how you feel, because kids are, right?
Yeah.
Kids are very forthright.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody isn't mature enough to really process that objectively for what you need, that can be detrimental.
So no one really processed it with you.
Well, I just experienced that me as Annette, I make people uncomfortable.
So was that a belief?
Yeah, that was the belief.
Yeah.
Is when I want to talk about things or be honest, I make people uncomfortable. Like I noticed very early on that when I had questions about my mom, that it made people sad, and I didn't want that. So just thinking, where can I talk about this, and who has the right answer, and who's actually giving me truth? Because it wasn't that I thought these people I love are lying to me. The thought I had as a child was, well, they're all saying something different. Who's telling the truth? Which one is true?
Yeah. How do you know what's true? I mean, that's a crisis a lot of people are facing, even with, religion and God and things like that. I mean, that is just a disoriented place to be. And that can feel very lonely and scary to not know where to firmly plant your feet.
Mm-hmm. And just, I think I felt abandoned a lot because it wasn't just from okay, your mother died and now you're abandoned, but your father's in prison and now you're abandoned. At my adopted parents, when they got divorced, they both were gone. And so I felt abandoned there. And then I remember I lived for a while with my great-grandmother, and then she passed away because she was like in her 80s, which seems normal now to my adult mind. But in my kid mind, it was just this one other person like gone.
Yeah. So therefore something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's usually how kids internalize it. It turns into a shame identity conversation, like especially with like sexual abuse. People will blame themselves because there's something gross or wrong or shameful about me that you thought you could do that to me. Like it's often like, or especially if a young child is, sexually abused and their body feels the feelings of, pleasure, and then they think, oh, I must have wanted it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it can be very deceptive, very, very deceptive. Young children don't process trauma well all by themselves. It often comes back onto, there's something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. It's my fault that everyone's leaving. It's my fault everyone's uncomfortable. It's my fault, and that's so common. So, so you were 7 when you found out. These beliefs were developed, obviously, and you had said that you have a recovery story and things like that. Do you see how some of these beliefs, like I make people uncomfortable, I don't know what is true, kind of led your life? Like, do you see that connection?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I see that generationally it stemmed from long before, I ever experimented with drugs.
Yeah.
The hurt, um, and I think it's really important to talk about, in part one, we talked about the rock bottom moment. And some people don't have to have that, but I did. And during that same time period, I had this overplayed idolizing of my dad, that in hopes that he was wrong. In hopes that everyone was wrong about him, that it was an accident, he was, wrongly imprisoned. People just didn't know the whole story. What kids would want to believe about their parents. And just this idea that if I could find him and reconnect with him, everything would be perfect again. He would solve all my problems. I never said that out loud, but through lots of therapy, I have learned that that's sort of the core belief that I had. And before and during the time of my rock bottom moment, he did get out of prison. And we did connect.
You and your dad?
Yeah. And I think my worst fears came true. He was very likable, and he was very okay with having a relationship, but the minute that I made him angry, he busted both of my lips, and this was after 22 years in prison. And so I just was so crushed by that, Instead of having hope in God, I think I just always, as a child, had hope that he would, one day my dad will come back. And I know there are lots of kids who have a parent who's incarcerated who maybe have that feeling,
And how does that affect like how you trust people? I remember I was doing a group the other day on belief systems, and a guy in group, he had been sexually abused as a child by people who he should have been able to trust. And he looked at everyone in the room, he said, "This is no offense to anybody, but I literally do not trust any of you," because of what had happened to him, So have you found that because of the abandonment, because of the abuse, because of the trauma, that it affected your ability to trust, therefore connect to people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which can also be very isolating.
And even the way that I connect now.
Yeah.
Like how I've mentioned to you that sometimes I will be honest to see if that person is safe.
Yeah.
I think in a healed space, it doesn't look like I'm purposefully picking arguments. It looks more like I'm sharing my vulnerability to see if you will respond objectively in a safe way. Yeah. What that looked like as a teenager is I will call you names and slap you to see if you'll punch me in the face.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or, and so I think things like that manifest in different ways. But I think a lot about my mom and her story, and I, without a shadow of a doubt, believe that she did not think that he would kill her. And I think that is a huge platform, and part of why I want to share my story is because as the child who was left orphaned, and even though there were still extended family members who loved me, and I think still do, I was still deeply affected by that.
Absolutely.
And I think if she could have gotten out, of just knowing that any form of physical violence, all it really takes is for someone to shove you the wrong way, punch you the wrong way, and you are dead. And your child is alone. And that sounds like a really harsh reality, but I have thought a million times of what if someone What if someone would have said that to her? You know, what if she would have taken me and fled?
Yeah.
What would our lives be like? Because she was smart. She was a beautiful woman. She was 18 or 19. I don't know for sure, but she was young, a baby.
So what are some red flags? I mean, even in dating, I mean, because you had your own experience as well with some domestic violence. And what are some red flags that you overlooked during that time that you can look back now?
Gosh, I think the biggest one that I wish I could shout from the mountaintops to not just young people, but anyone in general, is that marriage and children are not going to solve your problems. If there are already problems in the relationship, marriage and children, even on the best of relationships, are going to make things more difficult. So if you are in a relationship where you ever feel scared or like you are not heard or you are not safe and you are not married yet, then it's not going to get better. And I would bet, it's just not. I mean, especially not without years of therapy and counseling. You and I had talked about a statistic, and I don't want to mess it up, so I'm just going to say close to half of women who were homicide victims were within a year range of being pregnant. Now, what that tells me, is that postpartum and pregnancy is a very hard time.
Yeah.
It's a very sensitive time. And when you are already in a volatile relationship, it's only going to make it worse. Your high emotions, and none of that is an excuse. But I feel like if there's anybody who's watching this and they've either just found out that they're pregnant or, things are getting more serious, but they just already know deep down. They've seen things that are concerned. You asked about red flags. What does somebody do when they have to wait? How do they act in traffic?
Like wait, like to have sex? Or
That
to wait
too,
in traffic?
yes.
Okay.
Do they pressure? Yes, that
Okay.
can work. Do they pressure you?
Yeah.
Is it more about what they want than what's best for you? Just anything that would make you feel unsafe, but primarily I think how they handle their anger. Are they explosive? Do they, and really the juvenile things, do they blame others? Do they deflect? Is it everybody else's fault and not theirs? Do they have a bad day at work and then they come home and they yell at you? Or come home and kick the dog? Is it?
So there are things that we can often overlook.
Yes.
Because being human is hard, and sometimes we can lose our temper, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But if there's a pattern of these things, don't overlook them, is what I'm hearing you say. Especially if they're not taking responsibility, if they're not repentant. And so what do you suggest to, people who may be in a relationship and they're thinking about marriage, or there is a pregnancy before marriage, and they're starting to pick up on these things? A lot of times people are isolated in those types of relationships. What would you recommend to someone who's in that position? I know you had mentioned to me off camera the importance of community in the church and inviting them in to really speak into your life, and just bringing other people into that. Do you want to speak more on that?
Yeah, I think some of the worst decisions I've ever made were when this is what I'm doing, this is my way, come heck or high water. I don't want anyone else's opinion, and it has brought nothing but pain. So now that does not mean that the public at large, gets to say everything on your life, but when you have a network of people that have different perspectives, and what I mean by that is your doctor, your teachers, your family, sometimes your friends, and everybody's telling you the same thing or that they see red flags, they're probably not wrong. Yeah. Especially if those groups of people don't talk to each other and they're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, we can our affections can still be there. Our romantic affections can still be there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a healthy situation.
Right.
And is there a line that people can call, a hotline? Do you have that available to you, or we can just post it?
Yeah, we'll put it up on the screen or in the comments after this. But there's actually two. There's a 1-800 number nationally, and then there's a statewide number. And I think when you call them, you can get different resources to point you in the right direction if you need help.
Awesome. And so last question I'm going to ask you. What would you say to the girl right now who is pregnant or just had a baby and she feels alone and she's in a relationship that is volatile, afraid? What advice would you give her? What piece of advice?
Reach out to somebody. You don't have to have all the answers, just one right thing at a time. And that first right thing would be reaching out to somebody for help that's in a different position, whether it is signing up for outpatient recovery, or some church or your doctor when you go for your pregnancy checkup, just anybody.
Yeah. Say something.
Say something.
That's the first thing. Say something. And also prayer, reaching out to, that just came up for me, but inviting, especially like the family of believers into that, to pray for you and to be the family that we're supposed to be for one another. So I think that's a great piece of advice, is say something.
Yeah, because, a lot of times, or what I remember hearing was just leave, just get out. But it wasn't that easy. I didn't feel safe. I felt scared. I needed a plan. I needed somebody to help me make a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your connection to recovery. What did that look like for you? How old were you? What were you using? How did you come out of that? But really, like, what initiated that life?
Okay, so Papa can fast forward through this part. I think I was probably 12 or 13 whenever I dabbled with things, really just alcohol at that point. And it was in a group setting, like partying here and there.
How old were you?
12 or 13. Just experimenting. I think I was 18 before I had gotten into things like pain pills. And at that point, I was already in a terrible situation. And like we say here, I was refusing to suffer in sorrow. And so I would say that my recovery is directly linked to being in love with the idea of a person and toxic relationships, just looking for love in all the wrong places. And then doing whatever that person did, like just sort of being a chameleon, not knowing who I was. So just forming to whatever that other person, if they partied, then I partied.
Would you say that's the main reason you started using, because you were in a relationship and he was using?
I think so. Not that it wasn't my choice, right? Right. But I don't remember ever being happy in a relationship. I remember there being lots of pain and sorrow and still feeling alone. And so that was sort of a numbness.
Whenever you said you were using to escape the pain and sorrow, can you name that pain and sorrow that you felt? I know you just kind of said loneliness, but what else was there that you think you were trying to escape?
I think I always had this feeling of being unloved. And even though I know that there are people who love me, I didn't feel known. And I think that goes along with the whole chameleon thing, is if you can't fully accept and be yourself the way that God loves you, then you can't be fully known and therefore are not ever really going to feel loved. And so I think it was deeper than loneliness. It was just a void. Like
Yeah.
something was always missing, which I now feel like that's the mother-child relationship, something we get in our first few years, you know, that I didn't have. I lived with my grandparents in high school, and I think that my papa did as right by me as he could with what he had and the other children in the home. I would say I know without a shadow of a doubt that he loves me, and that my granny did too. I think that if you are not from a trauma-informed background, then there's just a lot of things that I probably needed help navigating, and the tools weren't present in the home. And I don't fault him for that.
So how did God come alongside of you, and what did it look like? Because obviously, you know, you today is very, very different than the girl that you're describing. So what happened from then to now?
It feels now so far removed that it's like this other person that I have compassion for.
Yeah.
I don't hate, you know.
Did you used to hate her?
I think so. Yeah. I think there was a lot of self-hate. But now it almost feels like, you know, this other version, this little sister who just doesn't know better. Doesn't know what she's capable of or what God can do. Doesn't have even the faith of a mustard seed, you know. And it just makes me feel sad a little bit. But I mean, he's still working on me.
Of course.
You know, but I don't feel remotely close to the person that I was.
What would you say to that girl?
I think that I would just hug her and cry, you know, and kind of like that woman did with me, and just hold her and tell her that she deserves better, you know, and that she was meant for more, and she's not alone. And I think there are definitely appropriate times for criticism and different things, but there are other people who are already so hidden in their brokenness that all they need is to be poured into, and they need encouragement. And I think that's what I would do, is I would just hold her up, you know.
That lady who sat with you in the hospital, what did you experience with her that was different?
It was just sincerity. She didn't want anything from me. She didn't she didn't look at me with judging eyes.
Are you used to people looking at you with judging eyes?
I think so.
Yeah.
You know, I think that I felt really grown up before that I actually was.
I can relate to that. I can totally relate to that. I always thought I was so grown.
Complete power over myself, and I shouldn't have had. You know, I tell my kids that all the time now. Like, boundaries are good. They're good, and I should have had more of them. But I think I would just love her. You can be so many different people within one lifetime, that regardless of how she's feeling in that moment, like everything's hopeless and there's no point, that it's not the end, and it just takes time. And it's not like you have to have it all figured out. You literally just make one right step in the right direction, one right choice after another, and you just keep making another right choice. And that there are tangible things that you can do to, you know, like find support. And God will be there every step of the way, just like I mentioned about the car. I mean, and I know I told you this off camera, that I cannot tell you at the people that gave me money randomly not for anything, but just like, I think I had a neighbor who'd be like, here's $20, go buy your kids some McDonald's. And when my kids were back in the home, we always had what we needed. We were very poor, but God saw me through, and it was members of the body of Christ, and maybe some who I know are believers, but I don't know if they would consider themselves part of the body of Christ, but they were known for their love, and they showed me love during that time. People that I worked with, they watched the kids while I went to college. And with every step that God would lead me to, He would put the right people there if I would ask for help to help support me to that next thing. And then.
So what I hear is like God really worked powerfully in your life by bringing people around you to love on you. And that was like the tangible evidence of God working in your life is the community piece. And, it makes sense because addiction, it breeds, it lives in isolation. It's born in isolation, and it keeps people trapped in isolation. And, the cliche term is the opposite of addiction is connection, but it's very true. And so, yeah, so you said that they would watch your kids while you went to college. And, I know that you now have your master's degree. You're probably a dissertation away from having your PhD, and you've been the executive director of an organization. I mean, did you ever imagine while you were alone and in a hopeless place and struggling to put food on the table that God could bring such beauty into your life?
No, I did not. Mm-hmm. And even how I got started in ministry, it's a whole other story, but I was afraid to ask if I could help in children's church because I thought, I don't even have custody of one of my children. Like, who am I to be teaching little kids, And the pastor's wife at the church at that time allowed me to be an assistant to the person teaching,
Mm-hmm.
And just her seeing some sort of hope in me, God let that ignite a fire, and then it went from that to I was teaching the class to then some teenagers and then women's ministry and then running the nonprofit, and just how all of the things I thought that I wasn't good enough to do, you're not, but that's where God comes in, and He is strong when you're weak.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're happily married to the love of your life. I know that you've talked to me a little bit about, just you two coming together, and you have a new little baby boy. It's so adorable. And I mean, it's just, I just love your story because, from where you've come and to what God has done and the flourishing that He's brought to your life. I mean, that's what He does. That's what He's in the business of doing. And not that being a Christian means that we're always going to prosper and have money and prestige and things like that, but He does take the weak things of the world to shame the wise, and He uses the weak things of the world, the things that are not, and creates something that is. He gives identity, He gives purpose and meaning, and I think that is so necessary for people coming out of addiction, for people coming out of domestic violence. I mean, you name it. It's so necessary to know, to have hope, and to also recognize, and you brought up this point, and I think it's very important, that it's not going to be an overnight thing, that it is taking the next right step, but trusting that God is good and that He has your interest at heart, that He's never left you. Seeing His provision, and even just a person giving you $20 to put food on the table, I mean, that breeds a life of gratitude, and that is life-giving.
And the favor that
And
he
the
gives
favor,
you in
yeah.
different, like, and it doesn't, and I want to be very clear about this because I think it can be such a disappointment if you're in recovery, is I still have problems, right? You know,
I do too.
and like life is gonna life.
Yes.
But what's so different is I know where to go. I know I'm not alone. I have a network of friends, of support who are also imperfect, right?
Yes.
I also feel like I've hidden his word in my heart, and it comes at just the right times, you know, and I know that even if I fall, I can get back up. I think that's the biggest thing that's different.
That's what's tattooed on my arm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is I'm no longer crushed.
Yes.
And if I'm crushed, it's for my heart breaks for other people who are hurting or in that situation or are feeling really hopeless.
The Lord makes us resilient. And I just, Proverbs 24:16, which is what I have on my arm, is the righteous fall 7 times and rise again. And that is the hallmark of a Christian, because we believe that our King is alive and resurrected and has crushed the head of the serpent. And so the bad thing, the sad thing, it no longer has the final say in our life. And so I just think that your life gives him glory. And thank you for sharing that portion. I know that this was kind of the first time that you've really spoken about or really processed out loud in form of a testimony, like this part of your story, the recovery part, the part that you haven't really wanted to speak to, you know, having children at a very young age and using substances and being alone and going through your own domestic violence issue. I mean, I know that that's hard, especially when you're initially speaking to it. And so I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for doing that.
Thank you. I think it's the perfect timing. For the longest time, I've shared my story on different platforms, not recorded, like I said, but not that part. And I think that the recovery part was more hidden because of my kids, but they're older now.
Yeah.
And we've had some of those hard conversations, and they know my heart to want to help other people. So I appreciate the opportunity. I hope that if anybody is feeling hopeless and they were to watch it, that they would know that regardless of where they're at right now, 5 years from now, it could seem like a bad dream. And that's it.
Yeah. Well, Annette, I know this was it's not the easiest thing to talk about, but nonetheless, it's a powerful story. It's a heartbreaking story, but, you know, it can absolutely be used for God's glory and to encourage people, to warn, but also just to see God's hand in your life, you know, and how he's brought you through. And, you know, I would say lastly that some of the belief systems that we develop through our traumatic experiences, oftentimes that's what drives us to addiction and bad relationships and things like that. And we can break that cycle. The Bible says to take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. And that's deliverance. You know, whenever these stronghold conversations that govern our lives are the power of those are broken, and the truth of our love and acceptance from God and Christ is replaced in there. I mean, that's when freedom and joy and our lives flourish. And I just see that that's happened in your life. And I know none of us are perfect. We still got issues. We still got, you know, beliefs that we have to work through in life. But there's no mistake that God has had his hand on your life. And so thank you for sharing. Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for being so brave.
Thank you.
This has been Waging War. Thanks for fighting alongside us this week.